Welcome to the sixth episode of our Schwarzesmarken analysis videos. I'm sorry it's a bit late. Sometimes I can change that if I'm on a convention or something. Because you're commenting on the explanation why the title is called Schwarzesmarken, etc. I dislike using information that the anime has not given us if it's just about the anime. We are analyzing the anime version of the show, so that's why I'm reluctant to use any other information. As long as the show doesn't say that, I'm not really wanting to include it, as I feel the show has its own canon. The visual novel was released just when the anime started, so it might be possible that the visual novel has a complete different canon than the anime, or even has roots. Someone wrote, why not take the visual novel instead of the anime? First of all, our language proficiency isn't that great. We can do normal small talk, but a visual novel, I'm still a few years away from that, so that's kind of difficult. One interesting thing is my grandmother has given me some buttons, and those buttons have a similar design to the emblem we analyzed, but sadly my grandmother couldn't tell me if these are from the east or from the west. But it kind of surprised me how similar it is. But I kind of doubt it, because I think if this kind of emblem would have been on any form of Eastern clothing, that people would have noticed and they would have prevented it. We see Polylux, this kind of overhead projector, and it's really common to East Germany. I'm not so sure about West German school, but in East German schools they are still used even today. Fuck, even in my university we still see these with the old kind of professors, and that's just not the age anymore. Please switch over to beamers. But yes, it's sadly still a real thing, and quite commonly used, so.
ベラルーシのミンスクハイブが活性化した。
10万以上
Alright, in this episode another hive full of beta activates in Belarus. Now here's a fun little fact I can tell you, because I've actually learned Russian in school. Belarus is literally Russian for White Russia. That's racist, Tumblr will scream. But don't worry, there's also a Black Russia. Chornaya Rus is a bordering region between Belarus and Poland nowadays. And there's even a Red Russia, Czerwona Rus. That is actually the region of Galicia. But not the Galicia in northwestern Iberia, but the one in Eastern Europe. And here I will probably stop, because I would only further confuse the geographically challenged viewers. Once again, I have to correct myself regarding Zweig. The comments for the last episode already pointed it out for me that he is actually not a Stasi member, but a political commissar and a superior of Gretel. The thing is, if he's a political commissar, he's a member of the Volkspolizei. The Volkspolizei, they were basically the people's police. That's the literal translation. And they, for a part, were also responsible for creating these political commissars. Now, the Volkspolizei had a huge variety of uniforms for all different purposes, and therefore I couldn't quite identify his affiliation from his uniform, since, yeah, basically it just looked closest to what we have seen of a Stasi so far to me, and therefore I thought he was Stasi. But keep in mind, I'm not really all that into Muv-luv. Schwarzesmarken is my first exposure to the whole material. So yeah, that was an honest mistake on my part, but now we know. By the way, his rank of Major is still correctly depicted. The epaulets are still correct, since they are pretty much identical when it comes to the rank of Major across the different institutions that there were in East Germany, be it Volkspolizei, the Stasi, or the National People's Army.
We see this paper with all the names. These are the names from 2 episodes before, when Marai got onto the computer and had the names of all these people in the rebellion or whatever. And on top there's vertrauliche Liste, which is German for confidential list. And it's a bit weird looking. First of all, it looks quite blank, and it looks not like something you would try to hide, like vertrauliche Liste. Here are all the names. This is this typical Hollywood thing with, oh yes, do you remember these names? Ooh, that's the thing. It's of course East Germany, and any terrorist organization in movies would never be so stupid as to have such a open list. It's just a bit bothering me how it looks, because, well, the name is sehr vertrauliche Liste, but it just doesn't feel real. I don't think a confidential paper would look like this.
So once again, Heinz Axmann appears, and this time in a fancy transport helicopter. Now, from what I saw in this episode, it seems to be a type Me 8. This is like the small brother of a Hind D we've been talking about a few episodes back, and this was just a mere transport helicopter, no big armament or anything. So yeah, again, seems quite accurate. I liked it.
アイリスディーナ・ベルンハルト対海洋性作戦中に反革命的な言動を行った容疑で拘束させてもらう。
Now, Heinze accuses Iris Dina of having made counter-revolutionary statements. And some of you might be confused what's so bad about being counter-revolutionary, because most of our systems would be very pleased if people did not incite a revolution or would even chant against a revolution. Now, you have to see it in the context of the socialist system, which is all set up in its ideology about bringing a socialist world revolution that would eventually lead into a socialist world republic. Therefore, if you are counter-revolutionary, you are actually against the state, because the state itself is just a mere tool of this huge idea of a world revolution. And that is why he accuses her like that.
そして妹の君はシュタージのスパイ。
Some people might be confused about the words the Japanese are using. For example, spy, like the English pronunciation. And that's just the thing with the Japanese language, I think, because the Japanese words aren't as much of a power phrase to hear, but spy, that's something that's catched on. So I don't think that's just a wrong usage of words, where we could use the German word, like Spion would be simply the German form. I think it's just the kind of way the Japanese language is, but some people might be confused. And of course, Spion would be nice, because the core of the word is still the same. I think if you had used the German word Spion, people still would go, spy, Spion. I get it. I think people are smart enough to get it most of the time.
Later on, we get a fun little history lesson, and I really liked that one. It mentions that the USSR had forces stationed in East Germany. This is of course correct, and in real life they were stationed here until 1994, but for the most part they were basically living in a parallel world. They were separated from the population and barely allowed to leave their barracks. I remember my father used to tell me back when he was still in school, he always had to pass one of these Soviet barracks on his way to school. And at the fence, the Soviet soldiers stood there, and they were reaching with their hands through the bars. And they would hand him a 5 or 10 mark bill, and they would ask him to go buy vodka from store. So my father, of course, he just took the money and ran off because he knew they couldn't follow him, and they were shouting after him, "Fascist! Fascist!" I thought this was a funny little anecdote. The history lesson turns for the worse, though, when they show a map of Europe, and boy oh boy, it has quite a few mistakes. First off, Austria is shown as a part of the Eastern Bloc. This is not correct. I mean, there was a Soviet occupation zone after World War II, because prior to World War II, Austria had a vote and decided to join the German Empire, because Austria is just as German as the people on Cyprus are Greek or the people on Taiwan are Chinese. That means pretty much to those who still don't get it. But But yeah, even though the Soviets partly occupied Austria, it eventually became a fully Western state in the course of a Cold War. Again, this could be explained through the different timeline and everything, but, well, the mistakes, they continue. The next thing is that Yugoslavia is already completely divided. Again, I could maybe chalk that up due to the different timeline, but here's the thing that bothers me. It even shows an independent state of Kosovo. Now that is a thing that only happened in recent years, and the whole scrambling of Yugoslavia, the whole Balkanization, which is where that term probably comes from, it happened in the 90s. And even if we have an independent state of Kosovo, the people in Kosovo who are living in Kosovo, they are mainly Albanians. So why not have Kosovo and Albania co-joined? It just doesn't make all that much sense. I think they just took a modern day map here and colored it the best way they knew. The next thing is a whole island is missing on this map, the island of Bornholm. Bornholm is a Danish island far to the east of Denmark in the Baltic Sea. And it is missing despite the fact that islands of a similar size, like Rügen, are there on the map. And what's bothering me specifically about this, you can't just say, okay, in this timeline Bornholm is non-existent anymore. No, bullshit, because earlier in that episode, the TSF landing craft Peenemünde was said to be near the island of Bornholm, so it clearly exists in this universe, but it is missing on the map. And the biggest mistake that really infuriated me was that the whole Black Sea was depicted as a landmass on this map. And seriously, don't tell me the fucking Black Sea has dried out or something like this, because I call bullshit. This is just, they took a modern day map and colored it the best way they knew. I mean, it doesn't even show a completely unified Soviet territory. You could explain this that they just show the boundaries between the different Soviet republics. But then again, I really think for this scene they took a modern day map and colored it the way they thought it was correct. So yeah, F-. We are then shown an old photograph of tanks rolling through the streets while the people from the sidewalk are, well, they're just standing by and watching and don't seem all that happy. The tanks seem to be Soviet T-55 models, and this would really fit into the timeline, into the era of the 50s, when the Soviets had to crush quite a few uprisings in the Eastern Bloc, and their tanks became basically a symbol of, well, crushing this whole spirit of resistance, as the people could just stand there and look and not really do anything against them. So this seems quite accurate to me. I liked that one.
シュタージがソ連とつながっているならすでにそうなっていてもおかしくないですよね。たとえ密接な関係があるとしても既得権益を捨ててまでシュタージがソ連と。
We also get to know that there are a few elements in the Stasi closely connected to the USSR. This is actually quite realistic because the Stasi had bases in Moscow and Leningrad, for example, which was simply to keep surveillance of East German citizens who were just visiting the Soviet Union. So even abroad in the communist world, you weren't really safe from the Stasi. And until 1990, the KGB even had officers in all Stasi main directorates stationed. So there was quite a tight interaction between those two services. But this whole internal conflict, at least to my knowledge, is pretty much a thing that only happens in Muv-luv and is explainable through the alternate timeline, because the Soviet Union is quite weakened now, so it's kind of realistic that maybe a part of East German authorities want to be more independent now. But in real life, the East German government did not need to be controlled by the Stasi really, because they were puppets of the Soviet government themselves. You may remember a few episodes back I was theorizing about a Stasi higher-up in a white uniform who could have been Erich Mielke. Now, in this episode we found out that his name is actually Erich Schmidt. But I think he is just this universe's Erich Mielke. It seems as if Schwarzesmarken tried to avoid using the actual names of historical personalities. But again, judging by his uniform and As he seems to be some sort of a big boss, I think that he's just supposed to be basically Erich Mielke.